Welcome into another edition of the Hops and Spirits Podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Green, and I have a great group of people with me this week as we bring back Under the Influence, the Roundtable series, and we're under the influence of beer once again. But before we get to that, don't forget to check us out on our social media at Hop Spirits, all one word, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And while you're there, click on the link so you can sign up for our Drinking Buddies monthly giveaway club where we do a lot of fun giveaways. Who knows, you might win a sample from my beer fridge or even the bourbon bar and some other fun giveaways as well. All you got to do, like I said, it's very simple. Go to our social media at Hop Spirits, all one word. Click the link, sign up. It takes nothing but a minute, and you could be winning some really cool prizes. And once you sign up once, you're eligible every month after that. But now let's get to what we were here for, and that is our Under the Influence Roundtable. I have no clue how this will look on the screen after it's done recording, so who's where, but let's introduce you to the panel first. We'll go ladies first. Kindsey Bernhard, host of Boys Are from Marzen podcast, porchdrinking.com writer, and a bartender at Gallant Fox in Louisville. Kindsey, welcome back.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be back for this go around.
We also have Neil Witte, master Cicerone, and founder of TapStar and Craft Quality Solutions. Neil, welcome back as well.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
We also have Bryan Roth, editor and writer at GoodBeerHunting and director of North American Guild of Beer Writers. Bryan, welcome back.
Thank you. Can't wait to mix it up with these great people.
And the newest addition to our panel, a little bit of timing didn't work out last time, is Doug Veliky. Did I say that right?
You got it.
Awesome. Chief Strategy Officer for Revolution Brewing and founder of BeerCrunchers.com. Doug, welcome in.
Thanks so much for having me. Looking forward to it.
Now, like I always say, we start out with one tough question. I did give you a little hint before I hit the record button. Obviously, we've all had maybe a little extra time on our hands as we've come up on about that year, mark on the pandemic. Have any of you picked up a new hobby, and are you any good at it?
Well, I'll start since there's a little bit of silence, and it's a little bit of a confession. I'm one of those people that started baking bread. I used to travel a ton, and I was just never in a spot where I could take the time to really figure out a sourdough culture and like figure out the waxing and waning of the thing. But I finally did it, and I've got it down to a formula now. So that and Frisbee Golf. I've been playing a lot of Frisbee Golf.
Nice.
I've been patiently trying to manage a yard. So this is a hobby by necessity, not by choice. I moved into a new home right as the pandemic was kind of kicking into high gear in 2020. So I've spent a lot of time practicing growing grass and clover and moving leaves from one spot to another.
I bought rollerblades, I guess, back in April. So I kind of rollerbladed all summer up and down my street because you really couldn't go anywhere with the rollerblades. But I mastered rollerblading, and I'm looking forward to strapping them back up when the weather gets warmer here.
Kindsey, can you go backwards?
No, unless I'm going, there's a count if I'm like kind of going down a hill, but I never mastered backwards. I mastered, going, being able to kind of look graceful and like I knew what I was doing, but no, I'm not backwards yet. Maybe that'll be this summer.
I kind of hit a wall in January and like badly needed some kind of new hobby. I was just getting really bored. And then it was right around when the whole GameStop thing happened. And that somehow led me down the rabbit hole of blockchain and how that pertains to like cryptocurrencies, and just not being a trader of these things, but just wanting to understand what the heck was going on here. So I've actually been having a lot of fun learning about that. It's kind of like mind-blowing stuff that might be the future, might be nothing. Not really sure, but it's been very fascinating. So I spent like time over the last month or so reading about it, watching a lot of videos, and it's fascinating.
Yeah, no, that was a very wild, well, it still is a wild story with what's going on there, and the amazing what Reddit and different things can do nowadays to what's going on. For me, it's been cooking, kind of on the Neil's. I'm not doing bread, Neil, but just kind of actually taking and not just heating up a meal, but actually like tonight I made what was dubbed mushu bowl, beef bowls. which is beef, rice, and a nice mixture of sauces. But I 10 years ago needed like a recipe to make eggs and bacon. So I think I've come a little ways. Well, let's get into the harder questions potentially. And this is kind of what got me on this question is Highwire is planning on coming to Louisville. They're planning on opening another location in Louisville. And also then just a couple of the Lexington breweries where I live have added a second location in their own cities, or one has a farm now, things like that. But what do you guys think about breweries kind of opening up a second or third locations, or even like a brew pub? What do you guys think of that? Is that just a strategy to maybe make their name bigger, or just kind of a smart business decision to, obviously if you can have another location in another spot, you can make a few more dollars, hopefully.
I can actually, speaking of Highwire, I can speak from experience. So here in Durham, North Carolina, Highwire created their first outpost outside of Asheville. So they had a second location in Asheville, the Big Top, and then, this was fall of 2018, opened up a space in Durham in one of the city's many older kind of renovated tobacco warehouses, and it has been nothing but a smash hit. Now, I'll say that having not been there in some time due to COVID, but at least for, the success that they've had branching out, coming a couple hundred miles east, I think that's the kind of hub and spoke model that makes a lot of sense. I'm very curious to see how it works for them in Kentucky, because they've had some experience going into Tennessee. I believe they're in Nashville as well. But when the separation of 1,000 miles, not that far, but we're talking about hundreds and hundreds versus at least in the same state, there is some advantage for people who know who you are. But it also, I'll say, depends on what the space is and what they can do, what it means in terms of how welcoming it is, and what it offers in terms of something new.
So when they announced that they were coming to Louisville, the city that I currently reside in, it's obviously a very big deal because it was the first time a brewery outside the state of Kentucky has essentially come into the state of Kentucky. Breweries have expanded inside the state. So when I spoke to the owner, and his name is slipping my mind, he credited to having, when they first kind of expanded distribution to Kentucky, he spent a lot of time here in Louisville and really loved the city and loved every time he came and visited the different neighborhoods that consist of Louisville. And they see it kind of as a way to grow their distribution even further west, if that makes sense. So, being as far west as Louisville from Asheville and Durham, it's a way for them to even expand further west, probably west of the Mississippi. And I think they also saw how well Highwire obviously does in Louisville, as well as why they expanded it. But it's interesting because you see, this is a time when you don't really see, to expand a tap room is weird right now because, people can't go to them. So it's, I don't know if people are planning for the future or they just see that as another way to grow distribution. So I think it's obviously, we're very excited for Highwire to join the Kentucky beer community.
Yeah, I think like COVID considerations aside, and like doing something like that in this environment, it's interesting to see that kind of model spring up, and how people are playing that as an expansion of their existing brewery versus the expanding via distribution. I worked for a long time for a large craft brewer that, and I got to see firsthand what happens when you send a beer that's beloved in the hometown, and then you send it halfway across the country and you go out there and people have no idea who you are, and selling is a totally different proposition. And it's hard to build your brand because you're not the hometown brewery. You're just somebody who's coming from, wherever. We don't know where you're from. We don't know anything about you. And we can get everything you make here locally and fresher, right? So it's really difficult to expand as a brewery, beyond a certain perimeter. But if you're establishing an outpost and you build a brewery, now you're kind of the hometown beer in a way, right? I mean, you're employing local people, you're making beer there, it's fresh. And so you've got that whole different angle. And so, like Modern Times has kind of done a little version of that. I mean, we even saw that as far back as like Green Flash. We all saw how that turned out, but that was different, a whole different discussion. But still, as far back as then, there were breweries that were doing that kind of model, like, we're gonna be putting some outposts here and there to try and be the local thing, where maybe we feel like distribution isn't going to be as successful. We haven't really seen anybody grow really big like that. But it's definitely a different approach to expanding your footprint for sure. And it's interesting to watch.
Yeah, Neil hit on a lot of points I was going to say. I think there's a lot of reasons historically why we've seen breweries of way different sizes try to do this, but they all tend to stem back to the fact of how important being local is and trying to be local in another place as well as where your original roots lie. Like we saw Goose Island was building, I don't know if it was maybe like 2017, something like that, where all of a sudden Goose Island was opening up brew pubs in Philadelphia. And for someone like that, I think it's less about the profitability of that tap room or restaurant, but more so the fact that when you're local, your brand is going to be able to command a lot more slots on the shelf versus when you're just an outsider coming in. So if you have this tap room that, even though they're not local, they're say Chicago or New York, depending on how you want to classify them, they get the kind of feel of local and can make the case for having 4 beers on the shelf instead of 2 at the local grocery store. And that's something that's the big win that a huge brewery, to me, why they would want to have tap rooms everywhere. Then more recently, I've seen breweries that have been open for years, 5, 6, 7, 8 years, who are just now looking into their second tap room. And for them, it's more out of necessity and deciding, maybe this wasn't their plan all along, but they just decided they want to control all their destiny. They want to control their destiny. They see their original tap room as their primary moneymaker, and they want to have a second one of those. Maybe it's just on the other side of town in whatever city they are in, or maybe it's in the next city over. But that's something I've seen happen recently. And then the last one is, their breweries, Fieldwork in California, if anyone's familiar with them. They're one that this was their model from the start. They started in Berkeley, California, but within 6 months, there was a Sacramento tap room, then a Napa tap room, all within, a self-distributionable distance, call it an hour and a half apart, but all across the northern part of California. That was their plan, because having a lot of tap rooms, especially in a given city, isn't always 3-tier friendly, meaning distributors don't always love this model. But so when you go about this, you have to be kind of willing to know what you're getting into. And so for a brewery like Fieldwork, that you can tell they never had any interest in selling beer through the 3-tier system. Their model was to just kind of own that part of Northern California by having strongholds in all these key places.
Yeah, I find it very interesting too, because you see it done differently. Another one that I think of that I kind of chuckle at, because they have 4 locations in, I swear, a 6-mile radius, and that is Braxton. They have their main location. They have a Labs that they took over an old brewery. They have a Barrel House that's kind of more of a restaurant. And then they went across the river into Cincinnati, because I will give them this: going across those bridges can be a pain in the butt. So I totally get that. I mean, do you guys just kind of see it more as like hey, sometimes it just works where we just want to stay local and expand, to hit different parts? Because obviously in bigger towns, not everyone's going to drive across town to the brewery every day, because it could be a 40-50 minute drive depending on where you're at, or even visitors. I know, talking to some of the Lexington guys, they're not that far out of downtown, but people visiting, they're probably only going to go into that little radius. So is it more just kind of their philosophies? Is that kind of what we're thinking? You know, whether it's a distribution thing or just a being available thing?
I think to me, it seems like the multiple tap rooms in the same city, or this, you know, the same metro area, is kind of more building on that brand equity and, you know, hitting an audience that's less likely to drive across town. But you're already drawing on people that already know who you are and like your beer and are inclined to visit you anyway. As opposed to, you know, going a couple states away and doing it, or even a state away where, you know, you don't have that local thing going again. So I think there's a couple different motivations there depending on how far away you're going with that. And it can be really risky the further you're going too, because it's not like, you know, you expand distribution, you know, that's risky, but you can always kind of pull out of the state. I mean, you know, you're going to take a hit in doing that. But if you open a tap room and fail, I mean, that's a huge capital expenditure. You know, if you're making beer there, that's really risky. So, you know, it's not an easy thing to do for sure.
There's one connected tissue, I think, to what we're all saying, and I'll credit this to Michael Urich, who's an economist. He worked for the Beer Institute for a long time and now has his own consultancy, Seventh Point Analytic, where, surprise, surprise, spoiler alert, the further you move away from your home, the less share that you will have of the marketplace. So he's done versions of this analysis for breweries, and every time, this is broad brushstrokes here, that basically if you look at something, your share of market within 15 miles of what you consider your home base versus 100 miles, the variability, so the decrease in your share can pretty much be directly attributed to the distance you travel away from your home base. And a lot of that is going to the things that, you know, Doug was talking about. That could be, you know, familiarity. This gets back to this kind of hub and spoke model that I was talking about as well, where, you know, if you've got geographic pinpoints that make natural connections, it's not just a benefit in terms of economics of margins when you can actually have people to your tap room, but then you get to a point where your familiarity, your relationships with other businesses, with distributors, with the way that you're going to be selling your product starts to really, really matter. And all of a sudden, where, you know, you might be a 3% of a market share 100 miles away, by extending your footprint, all of a sudden you're bringing that up a few more percentage points, which can mean a lot on the bottom line.
And to build on something Bryan said, the more when someone has an experience, even if it's not at a big production brewery, even if it's just at this tap room, that experience stays with you. And that makes, when you're at the store, whether it's subconscious or at the top of your mind, you're thinking about that place that you had a good time at their location, and you're a lot more likely to buy that beer. And if you've got a second tap room in a neighboring state, you know, call it one city away, you know, you've just, you know, drastically increase the amount of people that are going to have that experience, who might not have traveled the however many hours to your home base, but they've been to your satellite location and had that experience and have the memories of, you know, just having a great time one night. And it's hard to measure how important that is, but I think that's a bet that a lot of people are making as well when they set these up.
Hey, Doug,
when you posed this question, you mentioned Braxton Brewing out of Northern Kentucky, which I've been to their 3 in Northern Kentucky. They have their HQ, their barrel house, their labs, and then they just recently opened up in Cincinnati across the river. And I think the important thing with them is, I've been to the 3 in Northern Kentucky, is I can go to each one and have a different experience at the other. You know, I go to HQ and it's this kind of vibe, and I go to labs and I know I'm going to be able to try some of their experimental beers and have this experience. And I go to Barrel House and I feel like it's a different experience there. So I think they did a really good job when opening all these different locations that are just so close to each other, that when you go there, you have a different experience at each one. You're not going to the same brewery over and over again. So I think that's important when breweries decide to open up multiple locations within kind of the same area. And I think that's why they do it, and they do it so well, because you're right, they're within like a 3-mile radius of each other, very close, which is very crazy for a brewery. It's a risk, but they did a really great job at making each experience and each tap room different from each other. So you could do all 4 in one day and feel like you hit a different brewery.
Doug, I was going to ask you, maybe kind of the natural break off of this question, a lot of things we're talking about too, because Rev has spent so much of its time focusing on the in-state market of Illinois and kind of cultivating that in such an important way. How is it that you guys think about like what local means in this context exactly?
It's changed recently. So when we expanded our distribution for the first time, way before my time at the company, the thought process was to skip a state. So Ohio was actually the first state we opened. We skipped Indiana, went to Ohio. And then next was like Massachusetts, which was where our owner was from. It was one of those kind of stories you heard a lot of in 2014, 2015, wanted his beer there. And we're still there, and we still love Massachusetts, but that's kind of what led us there first. But much more recently, we've gone into Indiana and Wisconsin and had wild success, like grew last year, in a year where it was really hard for a brewery that's so heavily on-premise draft beer to grow in states that weren't just brand new states. I mean, we've been there a couple of years. So what's local to us is changing, and it's really becoming, Milwaukee and Northern Indiana and even Indianapolis, which aren't terribly far, because a lot of times we'll quote our sales in Illinois, our home state, but really Milwaukee is closer to Chicago than most of Illinois, and same with South Bend, Indiana, and all that. So, and even when you get into Michigan, we're also in Michigan, and you get the southwest corner where is much closer to Chicago, or we sell a lot more beer there than we do on the side with like Detroit, just because there's so much distance there between us and them. So we tend to think of local as our home state, but especially Chicago, and then these neighboring areas of Milwaukee, Northern Indiana, and Southwest Michigan has really become, a stretching version of local to us.
Yeah, I find that interesting, because you never know what the markets change, things change. The pandemic, I think, has taught us that. Something else that I think has changed for a lot of breweries, and I think, Bryan, I may have seen this on your Twitter or something like that, I'm not sure, but I've also noticed it from a lot more breweries. For the longest time, it was a 4-pack or a 6-pack, and that was about it. That was, or maybe a single can if we were so lucky. But a lot of places are now going to 12-packs. Not everything is in a 12-pack, but they might have a couple 12-packs. Maybe they have a variety 12-pack. Why do you think more breweries, especially craft, are now going to 12-packs?
It's that COVID life, right? Doug, I think I remember correctly too. This is something that you covered on Beer Crunchers at one point. So if you allow me, I'll maybe set you up, and you can oop this alley. Yeah, it was like, so it was the same thing that happened so often with everything else, early mid 2020, the pantry loading. And so large format, pretty much everything was selling really, really well. I'm looking at the latest volume numbers, which cover the 52 weeks in IRI tracked chain retail. So this is basically the pandemic, the full year of the pandemic. In craft defined 12-pack, 12-ounce cans were up 51% over the past 52 weeks. And that's well above everything else. That's above kind of the baseline for craft sales as well. And so, I think it just fit in line with so much that was going on. And it was also a habit of more people were just putting it into beer into 12-packs too. I was at the store today and seeing 12-packs from local breweries in Wake Forest and Raleigh to regionally distributed brewery like Wicked Weed in 12 packs with 12-ounce cans for the first time. So yeah, I think it just felt very, very close. Doug, what is it that you found when you were looking at all this?
So I started, this was like maybe mid-November. I was trying to write a predictions post for 2021. And my first one I started writing about was craft breweries going into 12 packs. And I couldn't stop writing. And then I ended up turning the post away from being a predictions post to being 12 reasons why craft breweries should go into 12 packs. So I've spent a lot of time thinking about this. And I think there's so many. I mean, it's what you hit on. I mean, COVID trends, people making the most out of their trips to the store, more happy than ever to walk away with 12 of the same beer. I mean, if it's a variety pack, even better. In the variety pack world, you know, it ended up, variety packs are getting more creative than they used to be. They used to be very bland and be four styles that have nothing to do with each other and not necessarily the best representation of the brewery. That's been changing, and they've become much more experiential and replaced the tap room experience in some ways and allowed you to bring that home at a time when there was no tap rooms to go to. The big reason is volume. I mean, you've got a chance to just sell more beer to more people. The retailers love them because they wind up net selling more beer. So they're happy to give you the spots. You can a lot of times get extra shelf spots by introducing a 12 pack. Cause like I said, retailers were so welcoming of them because it's what was selling. The more the merrier for any brewery that could turn one on or turn additional ones on and get them out there. And I'm a big fan of them because I think it gives breweries more focus. This is something I am currently writing about. Probably will post something tomorrow or the next day that craft beer lacks sometimes is like basic brand building focus, getting caught up in the heavy rotation. And a lot of small breweries, I feel like, have a winner that they just refuse to make regularly enough to make it like their lead horse. And I just think that's such an important thing to do, to never stop the one-offs from coming, because those are the pipeline to, you know, finding out what works and what sticks. But kind of forcing yourself into a 12 pack has many advantages in terms of kind of establishing that especially when you're doing it for the first time, you're going to do it with your bestseller. And it's a way to lean into that even more so.
Yeah, that market is
I
just
could go on and on. So
yeah, it sounds like it. I'm anxious to read that. I mean, I'm just thinking of my own personal experience. I mean, you know, I was pantry loading like the rest of the country and the rest of the world probably, you know, around this time last year, almost a year ago. And even now when I'm comfortable going to the grocery store. I don't have an issue with running up to the store if I need to grab something, but I still have that habit. I'm still buying bulk stuff, and like, you know, I've got extra space where I've just got more stuff stored. I'm just buying in larger quantities, and it's a buying habit that I have for myself. I'm not saying I'm the average person, but there's got to be, lots and lots of other people who are still doing that type of purchasing. So, that, and with retailers, probably creating more shelf space for these as well and being so welcoming of it. It's not surprising that there's so many more 12 packs.
So I'm going to take a different angle. I don't understand, me personally, the 12 packs. When I go to, the local beer store, I'm buying a 6-pack of I'll get doubles, but they're all different beers. Because I don't know if I'm still young enough in my beer journey that I want to try so many different beers, but if I was stuck with 12 of the same beers, I'm sure 8 of them would still be there 6 months later.
Don't say it, Kindsey.
I know, and I probably have this is a very unpopular opinion. For Christmas, my brother got me a 12-pack of Two Hearted Ale, and I still have some still in the fridge.
Oh no!
Don't worry, I'm slowly drinking them this week to get them gone. But it's to be stuck, not stuck, but I just like to try. There's so many beers out there, and I'm like, maybe it's just my mind, like, oh my God, I haven't tried this beer. I haven't tried this beer, that I just want to try them all, where I'm like, I can't get stuck with 12 of the same ones. And that puts me 12 beers behind of trying new ones. So it doesn't fascinate me, but when I see 12 packs, I kind of like, oh, who would ever buy that? But I guess there are some people, and this trend, you're seeing it more often, breweries putting their flagship beer in a 12 pack, and it is something I just will probably never get into, which I don't know what that says. Maybe in like 2 years, you see me walk down the store with like 12 packs of whatever beer, and I've completely changed. But right now, I'm just like, oh, who would buy 12 of the same beer? That's so boring. But
there were two reasons why I think why this is very, very important. One, Kindsey, I'm sorry. The number one reason is if Allagash is putting Witte in a 12 pack, 12 ounce cans, like something's going right there. But for everybody else, actually, and this was actually something I was thinking about today when I was seeing local businesses who have brands in 12 packs for the first time. The infrastructure is there now, is that the investment has been made. So even if it's a case, if you're functioning, say, with a mobile canning company, but you're putting in the orders, you now have put in the development, you have the orders for your boxes, for the cans that you need, the labeling for whatever brand is going, if you switched from bottles to cans, whatever it may be, from small to big, companies have invested in these things. And so, as with so many things in craft beer, the long tail is where a lot of movement happens. And when I say that, I mean the smaller local businesses. And so now that we've seen them spend the money because of the necessity of 2020, moving forward, it only makes sense that we will continue to see them, especially when they start getting the kind of positive reactions from, Doug, Neil, Jonathan, and myself. Kindsey will welcome you in a couple of years for sure.
If they put Allagash in 12 packs, I would buy it, but that's only because I can't get it here. So I'd be stockpiling that because I just can't get it here in Kentucky.
So Kindsey, you are not alone. When I wrote this post a couple months ago, I shared it a few places where I frequent, and then other people showed me, them sharing it elsewhere. And when it would be on like LinkedIn or Twitter, it got all kind of like, thumbs up. But someone put it on, actually Todd, the founder of Beer Advocate, made a post out of it saying like, what do you all think about this post? And it got absolutely destroyed. And the people on Beer Advocate hated it and picked apart everything. I've never gotten so much feedback, positive or negative, in this case, very negative.
That is awesome.
On a post. I almost want to like frame this thing. It was beautiful. I had so much fun reading it because I normally just get like real quick, comments like good stuff, and that's it. And this was just like dissecting every word I wrote, and it was very fascinating. So it's clearly, maybe there's probably some age to it, some like where you are in your craft beer journey. There's a lot of people who are just kind of exhausted from rotation and ready to commit to their favorite couple beers. There's an element of pride to it that I think that someone, this isn't my original idea, but someone brought up to me that they think there's a matter of pride to just the way that pack looks. If there's a beer that you've been drinking for 5 years, 10 years that just got put in this 12 pack, which probably looks beautiful compared to what 6 cans on a ring turned all different ways looks. And just like if you're like a prideful frequenter of this brewery and you see that at the store, there's some like, even if it's just in the back of your mind, a good feeling of grabbing that. That's kind of like saying, my brewery's made it. So
it's pretty cool to carry a 12 pack out of the store instead of the 3 ring. You look a lot cooler. You look like you're about to have a good weekend or a good night, totally, rather than grabbing the plastic pack tech.
The case is the boss move.
Now I will say it's interesting sometimes to see what beers are getting put in the 12 packs, because I would have never have thought here locally for me, Country Boy, they put their super premium lager in one, which is a 100-calorie beer, which I'm like, I didn't even know you had that on tap sometimes. But obviously that they knew there's a market. they've got 2 tap rooms, big facility to distribute. But I find that makes me think of when Bryan was talking about, like obviously there's a reason that's in a 12 pack, so they know what they're doing. So I always find it interesting too what they will put in the 12 pack. I'm one that would more prefer the variety. Like we're going to touch on them a little later here. It's Boulevard. They did one where they had 4 variants of something, like their wheat and then like 3 different versions of it. That's more of where I would go for a 12 pack, although I'll get a 24 pack of like, name brand, whatever, just so I kind of have some extra drinking beer in the fridge. But I always kind of find it interesting what they will put in the 12 pack.
Yeah, that actually is something that I think also took prominence last year too. It's not just the fact that the volume, the actual number of cans or bottles you get there, but in some cases, the approach to it specifically at a time where you didn't have the function to go out to a bar or a brewery to experiment. And we lost that part of our interaction with the food and beverage world. And one way to lean into that was, at least we can get some experimentation from a variety pack that offers different things. There have been some good examples over the years. There were actually more so last year during the holiday season, an influx of advent calendar collections, 12 packs and largers. Even a craft beer seller headquartered in Massachusetts, but they have franchises around the East Coast. They did an advent calendar that's curated by the stores. And so you'd get your collection, and this is kind of the extreme example of it, but it's specifically selected, and there are themes. There are breweries who do IPA 12 packs, which are mixed variety packs, Stone being one of them. And Revolution actually has done a really great job kind of leaning into that with the Hero series and the way that that's played. Doug, I'm curious. I'm just going to keep on tossing it in your direction. Thank you for being my battery mate for this conversation, because you guys just launched a brand new collection too. I remember seeing you sharing stuff about the wrestling themed production of a new mix pack as well.
Oh yeah. So we have 2 mix packs. We just launched our second. The first is called the League of Heroes. 4 different IPAs, but what we do different on this one and makes it such a good seller, and it's a lot of costs and work on our end, but we find that it's very much worth it, is that every 3 months or so, we give the pack a new look. Like the text is still in the same place. It still has a lot of elements that are familiar, but we, just like a comic book cover would have a different look each issue. Every 3 months, we change up the IPAs that are in the pack, and then the look to the pack as well. And that keeps that new and fresh feel to it. And we still like package it fresh every 2 weeks during that 3 months. So freshness is a big key to this, but as well as the variety. And what we do that I've seen not enough breweries out there do is to help a variety pack really catch on, is we make 3 of the 4 beers in it are only put in the pack. You can't buy them anywhere else. So we put exclusive beers in it, and that's the only way to get it. And then the customer is only committing, since they're trying a lot of new stuff through it, they're only committing to 3. So it's not as big of an investment if there's one that they're not sure if they're going to like or not. So we have that one that's always like changing and getting like a refreshed look to it. And then we just added a variety pack of our session sours, so our 4.5% fruited sours, same base beer, but 4 different fruit combinations. And that's a big bet we made on this category that we kind of stumbled into and turned into a runaway hit as a 6-pack. And so we made the variety pack as like, we did not want to make a seltzer. We didn't want to get into alternatives. We wanted to stay with beer, but we also wanted to make sure we were creating ways to bring in new people who maybe don't like bitterness, don't like IPAs, or maybe even don't like lagers. So this was something different to maybe attract a seltzer drinker, or I think a wine drinker tends to really appreciate these. So that's our new one. It just started cranking out a few weeks ago. So no good data yet, but the summer is when we'll really find out if we have one.
I will drop one bit of data just to put a bow on it from my end, at least. The top three style categories from 2020 in terms of volume growth, not absolute raw numbers. Fruit beer was number 1, IPA was number 2, variety pack was number 3.
Yep.
And I'm okay with that. And I would love to try the sours that Doug's talking about, because that's right up my alley.
We'll make that happen.
Hey, I'm cool with that. Our third topic is one that kind of hits home to me because I just finished up Flavorful February. Hopefully y'all listened to every single one of those, all hours of them. But Foundry Distilling out in Iowa does something really cool. They take beer, Boulevard, Stone, Left Hand Brewing, and then some Iowa ones as well. The mash, truck it up there, turn it into whiskey. But I also know in Columbus, Ohio, Middle West Spirits worked with Brewdog to make kind of a Boilermaker series, some whiskeys based off of beer. I'm starting to wonder, is there becoming more of a collaboration between distilleries and breweries than before, and not just, hey, can I have your barrel and put something in it? Because that's now pretty much done everywhere, but kind of actually true collaborations. I've been really amazed by those.
I'll happily go first. We do a lot of this. So I've got a couple pretty cool examples for you. About, I want to say like 3 years ago, we had a partnership with Pernod Ricard, who owns Jameson. And we participated in a program called Drinking Buddies. And there was a lot of other programs to it as well. But, we did a lot of events around Chicago with, like a beer and a shot specials at bars, but there was like small activation elements to it like that. But the big payoff for us was we got to go to, not me personally, but our brewmaster, our owner, and a couple of folks on the marketing team got to go to Ireland and brew a version of Jameson Caskmates whiskey, but off of our pale ale called Fist City. So we brewed a batch of Fist City over there that got distilled down and turned into this Jameson Caskmates that got sold in Chicago and was branded to look like our brand and the Chicago flag mashed up with the Jameson brand. So that was a really fun thing we did with them. That was definitely a more collaborative, or there was more to the story than simply just being buying some barrels from a distillery. We did something similar with our the beer that went out of code during the pandemic, when we had to bring back all this draft beer that was at distributors and buy it back. We handed over all of our Anti-Hero, which is our flagship beer, half of our sales, to this company called CH Distilling, who makes Malort, if anyone's familiar. Malort is a famous liquor around Chicago that everybody takes a shot of when they come to visit, and it's a kind of a rite of passage. And let's just say it's an acquired taste. And so we made a special version of that with distilled down Anti-Hero, and we sold bottles. It only yielded nothing crazy. It was like 50 cases, or no, it was probably about 100 cases, but we donated all the money to a great charity in our neighborhood and had a lot of fun with it. So that was another neat crossover to a spirits company. And then Whistle Pig is another distillery in Vermont that we've had a lot of fun collaborating with, getting their barrels, making beers with their barrels, but also having like beer and food pairing dinners with them, where representatives of their team came, and people got flights that had beers of ours aged in their barrels, but then also spirits poured, and then our brewmaster and representatives from their team would talk. And so we've done fun things like that with distilleries too.
Yeah, that's great. That one project with the Out of Code beer reminds me of one that Boulevard did some years ago with a local distillery here in Kansas City, Rieger and Sons distillery, Rieger and Company, and they used Boulevard beer that had been destined for export, and it froze on a container. Something went wrong on the container, and it came back, and Boulevard took all that and gave it to the distillery, and they used all the beer that was recovered and made a white dog they called Left for Dead. So it was a fun project. It was pretty good. It wasn't, it didn't go through a full like barrel aging process or anything like that, but it was a fun little project. I've seen a few things like that pop up, but Jonathan, to your point, a lot of the stuff I've seen is kind of just, we're gonna like, age this in the barrel, we're gonna take the distiller's barrel, that type of thing. That's most of what I've seen.
Yeah, I first heard about this experience or this partnership. One of my friends had a podcast, and he did it with, I'm going to pronounce their name wrong, Continuum Distilling out of Connecticut, where they use, either it's the mash or the spent hops from breweries. And I think they have two products. They have a whiskey and even I believe it's a gin. And even on the label, it says spirits distilled from grain, cane, and hops. So they even use, beyond the mash, they use the hops as well. I believe it's a gin. You'll have to look it up. It's called Continuum. But they did this, I listened to this podcast a couple of years ago. So they were kind of at the forefront of all this. And I thought the idea was crazy. But now you see other, breweries and distilleries, using each other's products to make, products of their own, which is very interesting. And it's, here in Kentucky, you always see bourbon barrel aged beers. I mean, for breweries here, it's so easy to get a bourbon barrel. So it's interesting to see breweries and even distilleries go beyond just using each other's barrels to make something else, making a different kind of alcoholic beverage.
Yeah, this represents a broader integration that, not just some kind of collaborative project so much, but even just the way that tastes are shifting and changing too. So this isn't, I think, answering that question directly, but I do think that, it is impossible to overlook the way that American preferences have shifted toward non-beer products, ready to drink canned cocktails, and spirits, which have taken a good amount of share servings from beer in the last decade. And so the further blurring of the lines, whether it is a beer made with or in conjunction to or inside something to do with spirits, the distilling process, I think in some way it also gets to what people want from a beverage alcohol flavor experience, which is constantly evolving and changing, and not denying that there is more interest than ever in spirits and cocktails, that finding ways to have natural overlap just makes good business sense.
Yeah, and I can piggyback a couple on that. One in Lexington has both. They are a distillery and a brewing company. Granted, they're owned by a large conglomerate, so it's kind of hard to really. But one that I was really shocked by that does this, and I'm sure we've all heard of this beer company, Dogfish Head. They have a distillery. I never knew that up until this year. Never knew that. And then doing some other research, I found a few others that kind of have both, and it's fascinating to me to see things like that. And also, I was really intrigued. I was talking to Nicole Austin on an episode earlier. She's the general manager distiller at Cascade Hollow, better known as the home of George Dickel, and she said she can actually take a lot of stuff from the craft beer world in terms of how they use their flavors. This goes to Brian's point, the flavor changes, and use that in making blended whiskeys and things like that. And I thought that was weird to hear someone in that industry looking at the craft beer world and going of how such a cool way of they all do flavors now, and how you can use that in a totally different field.
Yeah, one thing actually.
I would say, in addition to Dogfish Head, I think Rogue has a distillery, correct? They make whiskey.
Yeah. Dogfish, which for years has had their distillery located at Rehoboth Beach, which then moved to Milton when they upgraded that facility, getting into the RTD cocktail game. But one of the things actually unique, Jonathan, to your point exactly, was the last 2 weeks, I've had 2 conversations with people who work with or around distilleries producing gin, who are using craft beer as an example to do a variety of one-off flavor projects, basically, because gin being kind of the quickest to market version that a lot of small batch craft distilleries can make. They're looking at kind of the one-off specialty release process that craft brewers have had to such success over the last few years, and turning that into this week's flavored gin kind of process. So I think there is absolutely, there are things to learn and overlap there that can benefit everybody.
Yeah, and speaking of the one-off releases, I follow the barrel-aged beer scene fairly closely, mainly because we have so many great barrel programs at breweries out of Chicago. But there's been a noticeable shift started a few years ago and is really heating up, where the adjuncts that go into a lot of these, the pastry stouts, and there's kind of, those are starting to hit a wall. It's not that they're going away, but there's kind of not too many places left for those to evolve, and people have been getting much more fascinated by and asking more about the types of barrels that the beer is being aged in. And so there's been a lot more breweries trying to get 12 of the same barrel, so that the beer can be a true representation of the spirit versus a hodgepodge of a bunch of different ones. And so we're seeing Goose Island, we've done it at Revolution, others have as well, of trying to tie in the specific barrel it was aged in, because I think consumers are kind of finally ready for that. Like 50-50 10 years ago was doing that, but I feel like if you remember all the bottles with the different colors of wax, like that was really innovative at the time, but I don't think the drinkers of those beers were quite ready for that, or nuanced enough to pick them out. I certainly wasn't. But it just seems like they were almost 10 years too early on that. But it was really cool that they were that far ahead of things. But I feel like that is kind of starting to heat up a little bit, which is going to create more interest in these brewery distillery collaborations, and especially if you can find unique ways to do it.
I was gonna say one that I know that, or at least name, when you talk about names, and I see a lot of, or started to see some places go, this is aged in Buffalo Trace barrels, this is aged in XYZ. And I think that goes to your point, Doug, that the consumer is going to start paying a little more attention to that. Now we've had a lot of fun. We're going to go to a slightly more serious topic to close out the night. This happened kind of right at the beginning, or was right happening when we recorded the first one of these. And curious to get everyone's take. If you don't know, Boulevard, not their finest hours. We'll go with that. Getting rid of some folks, realizing they weren't as maybe paying attention to things like they should. The craft beer industry, you can ask anyone, they probably will go, what do you picture? They'll picture someone that maybe looks like this with a nice beard, white guy, things like that. But that's not what I think should be. Sometimes maybe that fraternity gets going a little wrong. What's everyone kind of think on the Boulevard situation, whether they handled it right or not, or just in general, what's going on and hopefully changing in the craft beer world?
Well, I feel like I should start off here, since I worked for that company for 19 years. That was a tough week for me. It's been 4 years since I left, but it was tough for me to watch. I mean, I've got a lot of friends who work there, and I've been gone long enough where there were some of the main players and everything that happened I had never met. But others I knew very well. And it was hard to see all that play out. And, my main takeaway there is that, you got to listen to women, right? You have to pay attention when a woman comes to HR and says, look, this is happening. There's only one way to handle that. You take it seriously and you take action. And that obviously didn't happen. And it was really hard to watch that happen. You know, I was surprised by a lot of what I saw that week, and then there were other things that didn't surprise me at all, specifically how Boulevard handled that. You know, I'd seen stuff in the management structure that made me think that they would probably react poorly to some type of crisis. But I think, you know, I'm hopeful for the future, despite the really terrible bungling of their reaction initially, not to mention how they handled it up to the point where it came out into the public. You know, they definitely, you know, they've turned a lot over. I mean, you know, they've lost 3 major executive positions, and John McDonald has come back, which I'm hopeful about. I think he's got some really hard work ahead of him. It's a difficult position for him. He's one of those people, he's one of the few people that could come into that company and command a certain level of respect with the people there. He's an iconic figure in that company. But he also, you know, he was there for a long, long time. He obviously founded the company, so he's got that baggage of having been there all this time and knew all those people, and so it's not going to be easy for them moving forward. And I think, you know, looking at it from you know, a little more distance, you know, this is, I think, something that's happening in a lot of companies, not just beer. I think, you know, people recognize, I think anybody who's been in the beer business for a long time recognizes beer and the beer business in general, not like craft beer. Everybody talks about craft beer as being like this kind of like, I don't know who said like 99% asshole free, which is, you know, a bunch of BS, really. I mean, you know, the bigger these businesses get, the more likely it is that there's going to be some type of HR issue, that there's going to be some type of bad behavior that gets overlooked, and some bad stuff happens sometimes in these big companies. And this is happening in different businesses all over the place. And we've only started to see, you know, in the past couple of years, some of these things come to light, and a big movement to actually make some changes. And it's coming into beer as well, and it's coming into craft beer. And you know, the beer business is an old boys club, and it always has been. You don't have to work too much in the distributor level and with some of the bigger breweries to realize that it's like that. And when you look at, you know, some larger craft breweries, a lot of larger craft breweries are old boys clubs too. And there's a lot of bad behavior out there. I mean, I've been witness to it myself. I've been in the beer business for 23 years. So some of this stuff is not surprising, you know, in a big picture standpoint, you know, and I think, you know, beer and craft beer has got a lot of work to do. And I think craft beer in particular, because there's this sense that, like, you know, we're all chummy and friendly with each other, and, you know, there's this feeling that it's like 99% asshole free or whatever. But I mean, you know, I think that is kind of almost like being used as an excuse to just overlook some of the issues that this industry has to grapple with.
I've only worked, you know, I'm 25, turning 26 next month. And, you know, I've only worked in this industry for a very short period. And I'm thankful that nothing like what came out of Boulevard has happened to me. You know, you get those sexist comments every now and then, but like I said, I've been lucky to have not experienced anything super major. But what I hope that comes out of this whole situation for other breweries is that you realize how important having some sort of HR is at your company. Whether you're a small brewery, you know, there's, you know, less than, you know, 10 employees, that you put someone in charge of, hey, you need to run HR, be HR, if something were to happen, or just establish like some kind of, not guidelines, but, you know, if putting something in place where there is a sort of HR program, because I've worked at breweries where there's no, there's, like I said, less than 10 employees and there's no HR. Like HR is not a thing. And I think instances like this show you, no matter how small or bigger you are, HR is important, because if something like this were to happen, you need to be able to deal with it and deal with it the right way.
And you have to have an empowered HR, because Boulevard had an HR
Exactly.
director who essentially like shrugged her shoulders and said, not much we can do here. And some of the quotes that I've heard were pretty bad. So, I mean, you have to have an HR that's empowered to do the right thing, and that is going to look out for the health and safety of employees and not just be there to run cover for the company.
Right. A lot of the comments that I read that came out, this was like, doesn't everyone know that HR just looks out for the company? Well, it shouldn't. It should be a neutral ground, and that's also something you should, if you're a brewery and you saw the situation, reevaluate your HR, or make sure your HR isn't just looking out for the company itself, but your employees as well.
Yeah, Kindsey, Neil stole kind of exactly what I was going to say on the HR theme, but just
sorry about that,
Doug. No, you helped validate it. But one thing I was going to add is, like when you interview for a job, you always talk to the HR recruiting manager. Maybe that's the lead off of the interview, or maybe it's the last person you talk to, or maybe both. A lot of times when you're interviewing, you just want to, you feel like you're being interviewed and you forget, or you don't put enough value on you interviewing them. And I can't stress enough how, for evaluating company culture, evaluating the strength of that HR leader is, and making sure they're not somebody who is just happy to have a job and is going to get rolled over on every day, versus somebody who's strong and going to go to bat for their employees. And I'm thankful every day for the HR manager we have at Revolution, because she's exactly one of those types of people that all the employees trust. But I know so many don't have that. And so many breweries just are too small to have a full-time HR person. So a lot of times the HR person is the owner. That was the case with us for a couple of years, where our owners were the HR people, but then by year 3 or 4, they brought someone in. And so I know that's the case elsewhere. So it's not always realistic. But when you're taking a new job or evaluating your current position, can't put enough emphasis on how important that is do you trust the head of HR to go to bat for you and stand up to ownership? Because not everybody will do that, but there are gems out there that absolutely will, and those are the people you want to be on the ride with.
I just want to maybe put some of this in context too. So like the HR issues we're talking about, and I would encourage anybody listening, the Kansas City Star had what I would consider the definitive story, with over a dozen interviews, reviews of accounts, reports that came out the week of these allegations. The HR issues stemmed from women who came forward to HR with allegations and complaints of misconduct, which effectively bordered on gender violence, inappropriate comments, things like that, which were, as the story goes, kind of set aside. It then became a communications issue when the brewery on back-to-back days first released a statement that said that the allegations that came up via a Reddit thread had already been investigated. The company found nothing to alarm them. And then the next day walked it all back. So then it was a communications issue. The third prong, which is the unfortunate reality of having to address this, is do these things become a sales issue? Because the human cost is real, and that we know. And the change comes is, does this actually affect the function of the company? Will they lose customers because of this? Which is a very unfortunate capitalist way to put this in context, but it is an unfortunate one. And we have a parallel study with Founders. Different circumstances. Founders was the basis of a racial discrimination lawsuit. And they had HR missteps. They had communication issues in which Their founders were very open and very public that they were in the right when a Black employee sued after losing his job for a host of inappropriate comments toward him. So it was an HR issue that became a communications issue. It was not a sales issue. In the state of Michigan, founders lost their packaged chain retail sales declined, but their national sales, everyone else, increased. And so in the end, it was an internal culture problem that is hopefully getting fixed. It was a communications issue that they're hopefully now aware of. It was not a sales issue. And so with Boulevard, we're seeing aspects of this repeated yet again, where in that Kansas City Star piece, on a matter of communications, and it was not clear to me as a reader and as a journalist if the lengths that they felt bad about what happened. And all things then lead to, is this become a sales issue? Of which it should not be. Point blank. We should not be. I should not have to consider, do people still want to buy Boulevard beer because of their behavior behind the scenes? But ultimately, that is, one thing that the company itself has to consider. And at least in recent history, from what we saw with founders, the answer is no. They do not have to worry about sales issue.
And I think not that should really have a whole lot to say on this topic, but to that study, I would go with probably gets very well covered in that area. They get hit hard. Obviously, Kansas City, the Star, major newspaper there, and other outlets. Now, us being in the beer world, kind of what we do, we probably are more aware of it than others. But if I went and asked my wife what happened, she'd probably look at me like, "What are you talking about?" And I think sometimes that's the sad part, because, to me, it should make a hit. I think if you screw up that badly, you should get a ding. You shouldn't be able to almost make money off of it. But I just hope more companies pay more attention. I worked at a newspaper, and sometimes I would wonder, like, wasn't, sexual comments or anything like that, but definitely a bullying situation, a male to a female issue. And one of my bosses went, I got to be on a call with HR. And I'm like, that shouldn't be your thought. Like, you should be going, why am I on an HR call, and how do I fix this so I'm not on this, and who do I need to, take care of? Not, oh God, I got to be on a call. Like, a lot of things have to change with mindsets for certain folks. And I hope maybe this was a wake up call for others.
I think that's, the big thing is just be more aware, no matter how big you are, if you are a Boulevard or you're a small 5-barrel brewery in Kentucky where you have, 2 owners and then like 5 employees, just be aware of what's going on and making sure you are a good, owner and a good boss. And just, and, Bryan, you mentioned all these things about, sales. I go to the beer store and I'm going to pick out my beer, and there's always brands that I just skip because I'm like, I don't want to spend my money to support a company that I know that doesn't care about their employees. So, it's just, like I said, just be aware, be a good owner. It's, especially right now, it's take the time to just reevaluate everything. It's so important and I know, social media has done a lot to make these things more aware nowadays. So I don't want to say, oh, companies are being more careful, but just, it's all about being, a good company who has good values and just, I don't know, you're putting out good beer, put out good, vibes to your company or whatever. Sorry, words are being very difficult right now.
No, but Kindsey, you make a very good point there. And then, like I said, hopefully not only they're making good beer, but they're making good choices and it's a good work environment for everyone to come to. Well, everyone, Neil, Bryan, Doug, Kindsey, I appreciate once again everyone being on the roundtable. A lot of fun, a lot of good talk, a lot of interesting talk, and a lot of different points of view. Whether Kindsey just doesn't want to buy a 12-pack, or maybe we'll get her into that at some point.
I'll buy a variety pack, but not a 12-pack of the same beer.
There we go. Well, I appreciate it all, and we'll have to do this again soon.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, guys. Nice chatting with y'all.
I just love the Under the Influence Roundtable series. Pretty much once we hit the end button, I just can't wait for the next one, and hopefully we'll have another one for you next month. Stay tuned for that. Also, if you didn't hear me before, check out our Flavorful February series. I know we're in March, but a lot of fun things there. Wild beers, how whiskey gets its flavor, turning beer into whiskey, and then of course our flight night with Urban Artifact is a lot of fun. And for those that are, big St. Patrick's Day fans, I mean, who isn't? If you're listening to this podcast, at least I hope so. We talked with Guinness Open Gate Brewery National Ambassador Ryan Wagner next week to talk about the brewery down there in Baltimore. It's a lot of fun there. And I can't wait for that. Remember, if you can, check us out on social media at Hop Spirits, all one word, on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Don't forget to check out our partners in crime, One Sip Beer Review. They're on Instagram at One Sip Beer Review. Near daily video reviews, some shenanigans, and also some amazing giveaways as well. Check them out. And as I always say, remember, if you can, give it a try. And until next time, cheers, everyone.